Stories of Danube River is a project that currently is presented in Art 19 in Vienna, and it is the result of a 5-year work, initially started as a theoretical research and then as an artistic practice related to the river Danube. Of course, that many times I have received the question, why the river Danube and what does it mean to me? The main point of this project is related to the fact that we are living nowadays in a society in which the tendencies of creating walls are much stronger than the one of adding and creating bridges. And this is the main idea that made me create this series of work, because I think this wonderful river gives us a sort of metaphor of what the border means on the water. It becomes fluid, it becomes a metaphor that rather connects than separates us. I created the project with 4 main pillars, and one of it is related to the river as connector. And as you can see here behind me, the work River as Connector, which is inspired exactly by this idea that on water, the idea of limit practically doesn't exist, because on water, the border becomes a sort of invitation rather than as a limit. In some of my works, you will repeatedly see this symbol of the bridge that I repeatedly use. It's like a sort of constant symbol in my works. Of course, that it is always up to us if the bridge becomes a limit or becomes something that connects us. In the time of the ancient Roman Empire, along the river Danube, the Danubian limes represented like a sort of military border along the river. So we had also historically this meaning attached to the border. This would be mainly the story of the work behind. Technically, I like to work in different layers of colors, so that I start from really warm tones going on more cold colors, this bringing a sort of deepness in the work, same like the river. Another idea used in the project is related to the river as memory, because of course along the time, river Danube, through the long history and through the many things that have happened, absorbed a lot of this history. And of course that there are elements that it is important to remember, and this idea had been illustrated in the project through a series of small works which I called mnemonics, and you have an example of it right here in my right, mnemonics Arakale, which is related exactly to this idea of river's memory. And I'm going to share with you a little bit about the history of this island. During the years 1970, in Romania, so we are speaking about the side of the Danube which is in the Romanian part, there was an island, and this island was called Arakale, and it was inhabited by a Turkish minority, and of course this minority had displayed the invisible and the visible heritage of the space. During the communist times, it was built the iron gates in the regions, and these people had been announced in a very short time that they just have to leave without a very clear place, space where they could go. Now Arakale is underwater, and about these islands we have just the memory and the things that had been documented, and it is important to remember this kind of things, and I'm bringing this mnemonics exactly like a symbol of memory, the things that have passed, and maybe some of them are not even visible anymore. The idea of cultural diversity and what it means in the daily life, it's another topic that was important for me, both as an artist, but both in my private life. Anyway, these two are hardly to be separated. Therefore, I created another series of work, which is called Morphic Fields, and you have the example right here in my right side. The morphic field started from a very interesting concept that I have initially found in biology, and it is related to a very simple idea. What is happening when we plant different plants with different properties in a common soil? And it had been observed that after a certain while, these plants will start to develop a common frame of properties which weren't existing at the beginning when they were planted. The concept had been very interesting, and it was brought in the theories about culture. Therefore, it started a series of research. What is happening in the places where is a high percentage, it's a high population of minorities, of people coming from different cultures with different scenarios, with different cultural scenarios, and of course it had been observed that in this area there is like a sort of richness through this kind of exchanges which are creating between different cultures. Exactly this idea I try to illustrate in this work because it is created through these different fields of colors which are coming one on top of the other, illustrated somehow the idea of this field of influences which appears when different things, different people, different influences are put together in the same space. Inner landscape is another artwork, is another piece of my work, which introduces somehow the concept of river as life, because there are like some series of work which had been made on this theme. Water has also, through its meaning, this idea of a subconscious reality, because it functions exactly like the psychological dimension of ourselves as human beings. And of course, underneath there is a reality which is harder to see and harder to explore in our current state of mind. So as I was saying, this is inner landscape, and technically it's like a sort of reflection of my other dimension of work, because I always like to mirror on one side this kind of geometrical compositions which are constructed in a sort of mathematical way, and on the other side it is this line of fluidity, of borderless compositions where it's just the material which is led in a certain flow, and this would be a second chapter of my work.